Before any awakening begins, there is one assumption that almost every human being lives with: the assumption that the self is real, solid, and permanent. We grow up believing that the person we call me is the same entity moving from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. This sense of self feels stable because it is built from familiar ingredients: our name, our family background, our culture, our successes and failures, our dreams, our fears, our memories. All of these form a kind of psychological collage that we believe defines who we are. But the moment awakening begins, this structure is revealed for what it truly is: a story. A powerful story, yes, but still a story, not a fixed truth. The personal self is not something you are born with. A newborn does not know they are a separate individual. They do not say, "I am hungry," or "I am upset." There is only experience happening. The sense of being a separate I develop slowly, shaped by words, reactions, and the meanings assigned to life by parents, society, and culture. As we grow, every opinion someone projects onto us becomes another brick in the identity we carry. You are smart, you are shy, you are difficult, you are talented, you are sensitive, you are strong. These labels become internalized. Eventually, they create a self-image we believe is us. The illusion becomes stronger because the mind constantly narrates reality. Every moment becomes interpreted through this internal voice. I like this, I don't want that, I am right, they are wrong. This narration creates the sensation of continuity. So the mind concludes that there must be someone behind these thoughts. Someone stable, someone solid. But if you observe closely, you discover something shocking. The self is nothing more than a pattern of thoughts. The I appears only when thought appears. When thought stops, even for a moment during meditation, in deep presence, or in a moment of awe, the sense of self disappears. But you do not disappear. You remain. Something deeper, quieter, more expansive remains. This is the beginning of awakening, realizing that the personal self is not a permanent entity, but a temporary structure the mind uses to function in the world. You are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness listening to it. People often resist this realization because their entire life has been built on the belief in the self. They cling to their story as if it defines their existence. But awakening starts when you begin to question the story. When you start to ask, who am I when I am not thinking? Who am I when I drop my name, my beliefs, my history, my roles? Who am I when I stop pretending? When this questioning becomes sincere, the illusion of the personal self begins to unravel. And what seems like the loss of identity is not a loss at all. It is the opening of a door to a much deeper truth, one that has always been present, hidden beneath the noise of the mental narrative. Once the illusion of the personal self begins to crack, another layer of identity starts to dissolve, the false self. This is the version of you that has been carefully constructed to fit expectations, gain approval, avoid pain, and survive in the world. Unlike the personal self, which feels like the core of your being, the false self is strategic, protective, and adaptive. It is composed of habits, roles, and behaviors that were once necessary, but over time, they become chains that restrict the true expression of who you are. The false self thrives on familiarity and repetition. It depends on certainty, control, and predictability. It clings to your routines, your beliefs, and your social roles because it knows that any disruption could reveal its emptiness. But awakening is disruptive by nature. It challenges the false self at every turn, asking you to face what you have hidden, denied, or compromised. When this confrontation begins, the false self begins to unravel. This dissolution is not gentle. It can feel like a collapse, a destabilization of everything you thought you were. Suddenly, the routines that once brought comfort feel meaningless. The achievements you once celebrated feel hollow. Relationships that once defined you may no longer resonate. The world itself can feel alien. as though you are walking through life wearing someone else's skin. Many people interpret this stage as a crisis, but it is, in truth, a profound purification. The false self is dying so the authentic self can emerge. The process often begins internally with subtle signs. You may notice yourself questioning why you do certain things, why you hold particular beliefs, or why certain attachments feel heavier than they should. You may feel restless, uncomfortable, or even anxious without understanding why. This inner friction is the signature of awakening, a sign that the false self is being loosened from its grip on your consciousness. As the false self dissolves, emotions long buried begin to surface. Fear, anger, grief, shame, guilt, and longing, all the experiences you avoided, rise to the surface. The false self had kept them hidden behind walls of rationalization, distraction, and suppression. Awakening removes these walls. The flood of emotion is intense and often frightening because the mind has been conditioned to believe that you are your reactions. But in reality, you are the awareness observing them. At this stage, it is common to feel disoriented or disconnected. The world may no longer feel like your own. You may question your purpose, your relationships, and even your place in life. But this disorientation is necessary. It is a clearing, a space where the authentic self can begin to appear. Without the death of the false self, there is no room for clarity, for presence, or for the deep realization of being. The key is to surrender, not to resist. Resistance strengthens the false self. Surrender allows it to dissolve. You do not have to act out of fear or push against life. Simply witnessing, observing, and allowing is enough. Over time, this process transforms not only your sense of self, but your perception of reality. The more you let go, the lighter and freer you feel. The false self falls away, and beneath it lies the unconditioned awareness that has always been present. This is the stage where the awakening becomes truly profound. The self you thought you knew is fading, but what remains is not nothing. It is something infinitely more real, vast, and alive. It is the space from which your life will begin to be lived with authenticity, presence, and truth. As the false self dissolves, what begins to emerge is a different kind of presence. A pure, unconditioned awareness that exists independently of roles, identities, and stories. This awareness is not something you create or achieve. It is something you uncover. It has always been there, quietly observing, silently witness. In every thought, emotion, and experience. Awakening reveals this awareness, and with it comes the realization that the self you thought was permanent was never truly yours. This stage can feel both exhilarating and terrifying. On one hand, there is a profound sense of liberation, a lightness that comes from no longer being bound to illusions or expectations. On the other hand, there is uncertainty. Without the familiar reference points of the ego, the beliefs, labels, and constructs that once defined you, it can feel as though you are floating in a space with no ground. You may ask yourself, who am I really? Or if I am not these things, what is left? The answer is not another identity. It is the recognition of awareness itself. True awareness is not personal. It does not cling to achievements, relationships, or possessions. It does not fear loss, failure, or judgment. It simply observes. It is spacious, accepting, and present. When you begin to identify with this awareness rather than with the constructs of the ego, your perception of life shifts radically. The world no longer appears as a series of obstacles, threats, or validations. Instead, it is seen as a dynamic interplay of experiences in which consciousness participates but does not cling. This emergence is often accompanied by profound clarity. Decisions that once felt complicated now appear simple. You no longer pursue goals out of fear, expectation, or societal pressure. Instead, your actions align naturally with the flow of life. You act not from obligation or habit, but from intuition, presence, and a deep understanding of what is true in the moment. This alignment is not intellectual, it is lived, felt, and embodied. However, the emergence of true awareness also brings challenges. The world outside remains unchanged, and old patterns may still demand attention. Relationships, work, and societal expect. Asians persist. The awakened individual often experiences a tension between the depth of inner awareness and the external pressures of life. Integrating awareness into daily existence requires patience, mindfulness, and courage. You must navigate the world without the usual crutches of ego while maintaining your presence and clarity. Another challenge is the temptation to grasp at this newfound awareness as if it was something to own. True awareness cannot be possessed. It is not a tool or a status, it simply is. Attempts to control or label it can pull you back toward the illusions of the false self. The path is one of continual letting go, releasing old attachments, resisting the urge to define what you experience, and surrendering to the flow of consciousness itself. Yet, despite these challenges, this stage is where real freedom begins. The self no longer dictates life. Awareness guides it. The fear of losing the self diminishes because you realize the self was never limited to identity, thoughts, or experiences. The self is the observer, the space in which all phenomena arise and dissolve. In this realization, suffering rooted in attachment, fear, and illusion begins to fade. Life becomes less about control and more about presence, less about grasping and more about allowing. Emergence of true awareness is the doorway to authentic living. It transforms perception, relationships, and purpose. It is the point where awakening is no longer theoretical or aspirational. It is the lived reality of existing as consciousness itself. From here, every choice, every thought, and every action is filtered through the lens of awareness, and life takes on a depth, freedom, and authenticity that was previously unimaginable. The final stage of awakening is not the dramatic collapse or the sudden revelation, but the quiet, ongoing process of integration. After the layers of identity dissolve and true awareness emerges, the challenge becomes living in the world as this expanded consciousness. Integration is the bridge between the inner transformation and the outer life, a delicate balance between the vastness of awakened awareness and the practical realities of existence. Integration requires patience because the world outside continues to operate as if nothing has changed. Society still values labels, roles, and achievements. Responsibilities, relationships, and routines persist. The awakened individual must navigate these structures without falling back into the old self. This can feel disorienting. You may appear the same to others, yet internally you are fundamentally different. Simple interactions, previously guided by ego-driven impulses, now demand mindfulness, honesty, and presence. Everyday life becomes a laboratory for practicing awareness. During integration, you may face resistance both internally and externally. The mind often struggles to let go of old patterns, attempting to reassert control. Old fears and insecurities can resurface, tempting you to cling to familiar identities. Externally, friends, family, and colleagues may not understand your transformation. They may push you toward old roles or question your new priorities. This tension can feel isolating, but it is a necessary part of embodying the awakened self. True integration requires standing in your awareness, even when the world does not validate it. One of the most important aspects of integration is the alignment of action with consciousness. It is not enough to feel awareness internally, it must be expressed through your choices, work, relationships, and daily life. This often means making radical adjustments. You may need to change careers, redefine relationships, or let go of habits and possessions that no longer resonate with your truth. These adjustments are not about renunciation for its own sake. but about creating a life that honors authenticity and inner guidance. Integration also deepens emotional resilience. In previous stages, emotions were purged and observed. Now, emotions are experienced without being enslaved by them. Joy, grief, love, anger, and fear are no longer reactions that define you. They are sensations passing through the awareness that you have become. This freedom allows for more compassionate interactions with yourself and others. You no longer project unresolved pain onto the world or seek external validation to feel whole. Instead, you engage with life from a place of grounded clarity and inner completeness. Another critical component of integration is the understanding of impermanence. You have witnessed the death of old identities and the dissolution of the ego, and you now perceive that change is constant. Rather than resisting it, you flow with it. Life is no longer a series of rigid goals or attachments. It becomes a continuous unfolding of experiences in which awareness participates fully and consciously. Decisions, actions, and relationships are guided less by fear and more by alignment with truth. Ultimately, integration is the art of embodying awakening in every moment. It is not a final destination, but an ongoing practice. You live as both the observer and the participant, witnessing the world with clarity while engaging fully and authentically. The mystery of identity remains, but it is no longer a source of confusion. You understand that the self is both ephemeral and eternal. The changing roles, the fading ego, the flowing experiences are all expressions of consciousness itself. This realization brings freedom, peace, and a profound sense of belonging, not to the external world, but to the deeper reality that underlies it.